Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Swift Deep Dive. And in this lesson, we're going to talk about if and else statements, also known as conditionals. So the idea here is, what if you could check for a condition, and based on whether if that condition is true or false, then you would perform different actions. So in this case, if the green light was on, then the car should go. But if the red light was on, then it should stop. So we can also express this in code like so. So here we're checking if the traffic light is equal to green, then we will perform the action of go. Otherwise, namely if this is false, namely if the traffic light is not green, then we will perform the action of stop. Now, similar to what you saw with functions, curly braces often contain more than one line of code. So more frequently, you'll see this formatted like so. Now, that's all very well and good, but in a lot of cases, especially in code, it's not always just true or false, because here our condition, whether if the traffic light is equal to green, can only be true or false. It's either green or not green. So we only have our if and our else blocks. But in real life, as with code, there's often other possibilities. So what do you do, for example, if the traffic light was amber? Then we might have to adjust our code a little bit to take into account this third condition. So I'm not sure about the highway code, but at least when I drive, if it's amber, I just press the gas pedal, and just as long as there's nobody on the road, I just go. Now, don't trust my word. Read the highway code. But if we convert this condition to code, then we're saying that if it's green, then definitely go. Else, if the traffic light is equal to amber, so we're tagging on another condition here, well then in that case, use your judgment. And then the final else is if all of those are not true, then we're going to stop. In programming, we call these conditional statements because we're performing different actions based on different conditions. So here's a challenge for you. I want you to either open up your previous Swift playground and delete everything inside, or simply just create a new playground. In that playground, I want you to create a function called LoveCalculator. Inside the function, generate a random number between 0 and 100, and then store that number inside a constant called LoveScore. Now, if the love score happens to be equal to 100, then I want you to print, you love each other like Kanye loves Kanye. Otherwise, I want your code to print, you'll be forever alone. Then finally, call the function so that you get a message showing up in the console, and 99 out of 100, it's probably going to say you'll be forever alone. So feel free to modify my messages as you wish. So basically, you'll have two messages, and depending on the condition of the love score, it will trigger either one of those messages. So pause the video and try to complete this challenge. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is create a new function, which we're going to call LoveCalculator. And then inside this function, we're going to create a random number generator. So we're going to generate whole numbers, so they're going to be integers, and then we're going to use that random function that we saw before in order to generate those numbers. Now, if you forgot any of these parts, be sure to just simply do a quick Google, do a quick search on Stack Overflow, and you should be able to find these bits of code relatively easily. You don't have to memorize them. And inside our random number generator, we're going to provide a range. So I want to generate numbers between 0 and 100. So now we've got our random number, we have to hold it within a container, right? So we're going to store it inside a constant, and we create constants with the let keyword, and then we're going to name it LoveScore. And then we're going to set it equal to the right-hand side, which is of course going to be a random number between 0 and 100. Now that we have our random number, LoveScore, we're going to use our if statement that we just learned about. Now, if you want to get a starting structure, you can actually simply type if, and on the left, you've got this little code snippet symbol. Then if we hit enter, it'll insert our code snippet. So it shows a placeholder for our condition that we're checking, and then finally for our code that needs to execute if that condition was true. So our condition in this case is whether if the love score that we generated is equal to 100. Now notice that there's a big difference between two equal signs and one equal sign. Two equal signs means that we're checking if the left-hand side is equal to the right-hand side. So this entirety is going to be a condition that's going to be true or false. And if you wanted to see what this is actually going to be equal to, then feel free to try and print it. Then you can see that this will be true or false. So this double equals means checking if left-hand side equals right-hand side. A single equals means make the left-hand side equal to the right-hand side. So it's assignment versus checking. Now we've checked if the love score is equal to 100. Well, then in this case, the code that should execute is a print statement that says you love each other like Kanye loves Kanye, which is a lot. Now, if they get 100, that's what's going to print. But then we're going to add an else statement to trigger if that was not true. So if the love score was not equal to 100, then in this condition, we're going to print, you'll be forever alone. Cool. So now the final thing to do is to actually call our function loveCalculator so that we actually trigger the running of this function. And if we hit play, it will say you'll be forever alone because the score that got generated was 23. And you can click play a number of times to see some different scores. Now, it's going to be pretty unlikely that I'll ever be able to reach 100, so that I'm not going to try. But this is essentially the solution to our challenge. So we've seen the is equal to check, but there's actually a whole bunch of other checks we can make as well. Whether if something is not equal to is an exclamation mark and an equal sign, whether something is greater than or lesser than, greater than or equal, lesser than or equal to. So you can use all of these different comparison operators to compare the left-hand side and the right-hand side. And then the end result is a condition that will still be true or false, which determines whether if your if statement gets run or if your else statement gets run. Here's the second part of our challenge. I want you to modify the loveCalculator so we'll get our you love each other like Kanye loves Kanye message trigger more frequently, and it should print that message if the love score is greater than 80. Otherwise, if the love score is between 40 and 80, then it should print you go together like Coke and Mentos. And finally, if the love score is less than 40, you should print you'll be forever alone. So go ahead and try to make those modifications to your loveCalculator and complete the challenge now. All right, so all we need to do here is to change our condition here from checking whether if love score is equal to 100 to whether if it's greater than 80. And then we're going to add that else if, which checks for the next condition. So else if love score is greater than 40. And in this condition, we're going to print you go together like Coke and Mentos. Cool. So now finally there is the final else statement which will catch everything else, and including if the love score was not greater than 40 and not greater than 80. So this is the solution to our challenge. Now, if you're wondering how our code actually flows, then let's think about a couple of example numbers that we might generate. Let's say that we generate 55. Well, the first condition checks if love score is greater than 80, so that's going to be false. So we're going to skip that one. And then the next condition to check is going to be if the love score is greater than 40, which is true. 55 is greater than 40. So it's going to do this block here. And then once it's done, it's going to complete, and that's going to be the end of the running of our function. Now, let's say that we had a higher score that we generated. Say we generated an 85. Well, in this case, love score is indeed greater than 80. So this block will trigger, and then it's going to skip checking all of the other conditions because these conditions have an else in front of it. So it reads kind of like English. Well, if love score is greater than 80, then do A, else, so namely if this was false, then check this, else do this. So none of these else statements will trigger because the original if statement is already true and has already been triggered. So here's a bit of a brain teaser. What if instead of having an else if here, I replaced it with an if? What do you think would happen in this case? Pause the video and have a think about it. And if you want to see the solution, just change your code in your playground and you'll be able to check whether if you managed to predict the outcome correctly. The difference between the else if and the if statement is that in this case, we're going to check if the love score is greater than 80, which it is, so it's going to do A. But then because there is no else that's coming up, it's going to check the next condition, which is whether if love score is greater than 40, and 85 is indeed greater than 40. So it's going to do B as well before it retires. So in this case, because we don't have the else if, it means that it's going to check all of the conditions with an if, but if you have an else if, it means it will skip it as long as the previous one or one of the previous ones were true. Now, the final thing that I want to show you is that you can also use these combinations where you can combine these checks so that you can check if two conditions are both true, or if one of the conditions are true, or finally, if something is not true. For example, in terms of our love calculator, we could also write the code like so, right? We could say that if love score is greater than 80, then do A. And then we could use an if statement that checks if love score is greater than 40 and it's less than or equal to 80. So between 40 and 80. Well, in this case, it's going to do B. So now, even though we still have two if statements like before, this time it's actually only going to execute one of these blocks, because even if the first one was true and it's going to do A, it's going to continue and check the next one. But the next one is actually not true anymore because love score 85 is indeed greater than 40. But this condition also requires that love score must be less than or equal to 80. Because one of these is not true, therefore this condition overall is going to be false. And you can have a go at changing the conditions in your playground to use the and or the or and the not to see how each of these work. So now that you've learned all about the Swift conditional statement, the if, the else, and else if, then it's time to head over to Replit and complete the if-else assignment. So pause the video and have a go at that.